The pen in Sylvia Hayward's hand had stopped moving 3 times already, but her attorney kept her voice low and steady. "Just your name, Sylvia. That's all." Across the polished conference table at the Avery and Associates headquarters on Michigan Avenue, her husband, soon to be her former husband, sat scrolling through his phone as if the dissolution of their 7-year marriage was a minor inconvenience between calls. Brennan Avery hadn't looked at her once since they entered the room. His suit was the same charcoal Tom Ford he'd worn on their honeymoon. His posture was the same relaxed authority he carried into every room. Only now, that authority was aimed entirely away from her. Sylvia was 36 years old and 7 months pregnant with twins. She pressed the pen to paper. The signature came out shaky, the letters of her name splitting apart like they couldn't hold together. Outside, Chicago's early November wind drove sleet against the floor-to-ceiling windows, and the lakefront below looked like hammered steel. Brennan stood the moment the ink dried. "I appreciate you keeping this clean," he said, already buttoning his jacket. "The movers will clear your studio space by Friday." Not her apartment. Her studio space. The design office she had built inside their shared building, the one where she had drafted plans for 3 of his company's flagship hotel interiors. All credited to the Avery and Associates brand. All owned legally by him. She had signed away 7 years of her life, 2 unborn children's financial security, and most of her professional portfolio in one afternoon. She didn't say a word. She gathered her bag, thanked her attorney in a voice that didn't crack, and walked to the elevator. The lobby Christmas decorations were already up. Gold ribbon and white poinsettias, and they felt like mockery. She stepped out onto Michigan Avenue and let the sleet hit her face until she could breathe again. "We're going to be okay," she said quietly, one hand pressed flat against her belly. The babies moved, a slow rolling shift she had come to recognize as their answer to everything. "I know it doesn't look like it right now, but we are." A photographer appeared from the corner of the building, lens already raised. "Miss Hayward, can you confirm the divorce is finalized? Is it true Brennan's already filing a new company trademark before the wedding?" Sylvia kept walking. She already knew what the wedding meant. The gossip sites had been running Talia Cruz's engagement photos for 2 weeks. The influencer's signature wide smile, the 6-carat ring that had appeared on her left hand the same morning. Sylvia's attorney received the divorce petition. The tabloids called it a natural evolution. One columnist had written, "Avery trades up from the drafting board to the runway." She had read that line 3 times, alone at her kitchen table, before she closed the laptop and stopped reading entirely. The apartment she moved into was a 1-bedroom on the north side of Wicker Park. 2nd floor, radiator heat, windows that rattled when the L train passed. It was everything that Brennan Avery's world was not, and she chose it deliberately. Her savings were thin. 7 years of marriage to a man who controlled the finances had left her with less than she'd realized. But the apartment was hers. No shared deed. No shared name on the mailbox. Her best friend, Gwendolyn Torres, arrived the first night with grocery bags and a bottle of sparkling water, because Gwen remembered without being reminded that Sylvia couldn't drink. "He's going to try to take the portfolio too," Gwen said, spreading folders across the kitchen table. She was a contract attorney, small firm, one of the sharpest people Sylvia had ever known. The hotel designs, the concept boards, the pitch decks, all of it is technically under the Avery trademark. He'll argue joint property. Can he win that? He can try. Gwen's jaw was set, but you have emails, timestamp records, sketches with your handwriting dated before the company even existed. We build the record now before he thinks to scrub it. They worked until midnight. Sylvia sat at the table with her hands wrapped around a mug of chamomile, pulling up archived files on her old laptop while Gwen took notes. It wasn't the life she had imagined for herself at 36, but it was action, and action felt better than the alternative. The alternative was lying in the dark listening to the radiator knock, while the internet published flattering photos of Brennan and Talia at a charity gala tagged. "New chapter. You need to sleep," Gwen finally said. 2 heartbeats in there depending on you." Sylvia touched her stomach. "I know, I just can't stop yet." "You're not stopping. You're regrouping." Gwen gathered the folders into a neat stack. "There's a difference. One of them leads somewhere." The week Brennan married Talia Cruz at the Waldorf Astoria in Chicago, Sylvia was at a prenatal appointment at Northwestern Memorial, sitting in a paper gown under fluorescent light, trying to remember the last time she had eaten a real meal. The perinatologist, a calm woman named Dr. Reeves, sat across from her with the ultrasound images spread on the desk. "Both girls are measuring well," she said. "But your blood pressure concerns me, Sylvia. I'm seeing the early markers of preeclampsia. We need to manage stress aggressively, or we'll be talking about early delivery." "I'm managing it." Dr. Reeves looked at her with the particular patience of someone who had heard that sentence many times. "I know you believe that, but your body is telling me otherwise. Do you have support at home?" She had Gwen. She had her mother, 3 hours away in Milwaukee, who had offered to come and been gently refused twice. She had the quiet daily fact of doing everything alone. "I'm fine," she said. "What do I need to do?" Dr. Reeves gave her a list. Less screen time, more sleep, limited physical exertion, and a referral to the hospital's high-risk obstetrics program, which held its coordination meetings on the 4th floor, where the waiting area had wide chairs and a view of Lake Michigan going gray in the November light. She was sitting in one of those chairs 2 weeks later, sketching absently in her notebook, floor plans from memory, because she couldn't stop her brain even when everything else had slowed. When the man across from her looked up from a binder of financial documents and said, "Are you an architect?" She raised her eyes. He was somewhere in his early 40s, in a wool blazer that fit the way expensive things fit, dark hair going slightly silver at the temples. He was pointing at her notebook with a question in his expression, not intrusive, just genuinely curious. "Interior design," she said. "Hospitals, mostly. Before." "Before?" She hesitated. "It's complicated." He nodded, as if that were a complete answer which she appreciated. "I'm here for a board meeting," he said, gesturing vaguely toward the hallway. "Pemberton Foundation funds the pediatric renovation on this floor. I try to come once a quarter to see how it's actually going, rather than just reading reports about it." "Does that help?" "Usually. Reports are optimistic by nature." He smiled briefly. "Lucas Pemberton." "Sylvia Hayward." He didn't react to her name. Either he didn't follow design industry gossip, or he was polite enough not to acknowledge it. She wasn't sure which she preferred. His phone buzzed and he glanced at it, then silenced it and set it face down on his knee. They sat in companionable quiet for a few minutes. A nurse called a name from a clipboard. The lake shifted through the window, all pewter and motion. "Those floor plans," Lucas said carefully. "The ones you're drawing, the proportions look like inpatient rooms." She looked down at her notebook. He was right. She hadn't even noticed she was doing it. "Habit," she said. "I've spent the past 3 years thinking about how hospital rooms could feel less like hospital rooms. What would it take?" It was such a direct question that she answered it honestly, without professional reserve. "Natural light," she told him. "Acoustic paneling that doesn't look clinical. Color temperature that shifts across the day. Surfaces that are easy to sanitize but don't announce themselves as institutional." He listened the way people listen when they actually want to know something. And she found herself talking for 10 minutes without stopping. His board meeting started. He stood, buttoned his jacket, and said, "I'd like to continue this conversation, if that's something you'd be open to. As a professional consultation. As whatever you're comfortable with." She looked at him for a long moment. He met her eyes without flinching or overselling it. Just steady, like a man who had learned that patience was the only reliable currency. "I'll think about it," she said. He handed her a card, plain cream stock, just his name and a number. "Take your time." She didn't call for 2 weeks, because those 2 weeks were consumed by the letter from Brennan's attorney. It arrived by courier, heavy cream envelope, return address a Loop law firm that charged $400 an hour and 8 smaller firms for entertainment. 6 pages of precise legal language that added up to a single threat. Brennan Avery was claiming ownership of her design work from the past 7 years, including projects she had conceived and executed independently. He was demanding she cease using those projects in any portfolio pitch or professional presentation. "He can't do this," Gwen said over the phone. but there was tension under the words that Sylvia recognized. But he can try. Yes, he can try. A pause. Come to my office in the morning. Bring everything you have. The original sketches. Every email you sent from a personal account. Any text where you referenced a project before it was under the Avery umbrella. He's counting on you not having it. She had it. All of it. 7 years of careful, almost compulsive documentation. Because she had always known, somewhere quiet and unspeakable, that a man who controlled everything would one day attempt to control this too. She spent the night at the kitchen table, going through external hard drives, while Chicago sleet turned the windows opaque, cataloging each file, with the steady focus of someone who understood that this was not the fight she could afford to lose. She called Lucas Pemberton the following week. Not because she needed saving. Because she had been thinking about the hospital corridor conversation for 2 weeks, and she had decided deliberately that she was allowed to want something ordinary. A conversation with someone who asked real questions, while simultaneously fighting for her professional survival. They met at a coffee shop in River North. He was there before her, seated at a corner table with an open notebook, and he stood when she came in, which was a small thing that she noticed. She told him the situation plainly. Not as a plea for help. She was clear about that, but because concealing it felt like starting something on a cracked foundation. He listened without interrupting. "What do you need?" he said when she finished. "To win the IP case, to not be financially destroyed by legal fees before the babies come, and to work again afterward." She set her hands flat on the table, in that order. "I can't help with the first two," he said. "That's Gwen's territory, not mine. But the third, I've been looking for a lead designer for the pediatric wing project on the 4th floor. We have a foundation budget and a board that's been unhappy with our current firm's proposals for 8 months." She stared at him. "You're offering me a commission." "I'm offering you an interview. There's a difference." He held her gaze. "One of them leads somewhere." She almost smiled at that. She had said something like it to herself months ago, in the dark, with Gwen's folders spread across her table. "When?" she said. By the time the twins arrived, they came 3 weeks early, in the middle of a February night, with Gwen asleep in the waiting room chair, and Lucas pacing the hospital corridor outside, because he had driven Sylvia from the apartment at 2 in the morning when the contractions wouldn't stop, and neither of them had said anything about what that meant. His being the one she called. 2 girls, both breathing on their own within the hour. Sylvia lay in the dim quiet of recovery with a daughter on each side and felt something she hadn't expected. Not relief, exactly, but arrival. As if everything that had been happening to her had been happening toward this moment, and now she was simply here in it. Gwen appeared in the doorway, holding 2 cups of terrible hospital coffee. "They're the most beautiful things I have ever seen," she said, and then pressed a cup into Sylvia's free hand and stood there quietly crying without making a sound about it. Lucas stayed until morning. He sat outside the room mostly, and when Sylvia asked a nurse to let him in, he stood at the foot of the bed and looked at the 2 small faces with an expression she would remember for a long time. Not ownership, not performance, just something that looked like it was resetting something inside him. "I should let you sleep," he said. "You should," she agreed. "Thank you for driving." "Anyone would have." "They wouldn't," she said. "But thank you for being the kind of person who does." The IP case went to mediation 6 weeks after the birth. Gwen stood across the conference table from Brennan's attorneys with years of documented evidence and the particular contained fury of someone who had been waiting a long time to use it. She walked them through timestamp records, email chains, client correspondence, and one pivotal deposition from Sylvia's former colleague who confirmed, under oath, that 3 of the contested hotel projects had been conceived and largely executed before Sylvia had formally joined the Avery & Associates corporate structure. Brennan sat at the far end of the table in his best suit, flanked by 2 attorneys who were increasingly saying less. He had the expression of a man who had expected this to be easier. "The alternative to a negotiated settlement," Gwen said calmly, "is a full trial with full discovery, which means financial records, communication logs, and any other documentation we might surface regarding Avery & Associates' billing practices over the past 7 years." She let that land. "Our client has been very patient, I wouldn't test it further. Brennan's lead attorney called for a recess. When they returned, the offer on the table was the one Gwen had drafted 3 weeks prior. Full attribution of the 4 contested projects. Licensing rights retained by Sylvia. A settlement that covered her legal fees and contributed a meaningful sum toward the children's educational trust. She signed it in a room that smelled of bad coffee and fluorescent light, and this time her name came out steady. The dinner that followed was just Gwen, Sylvia, and 2 babies in matching onises asleep in their carriers on the restaurant booth seat, because they couldn't be left yet and they weren't old enough to require explanation. "He's going to try something else," Gwen said, refilling her wine glass. "Men like Brennan always do." "I know," Sylvia said, "but the next time I'll be ready before he starts." She was. When Brennan's attorney sent a letter 8 weeks later, vague, exploratory language around the children's welfare and a father's right to be involved, she and Gwen were already prepared. They didn't react publicly. They documented his complete absence during the pregnancy, the birth, the first 3 months of life. Not as a weapon, but as a record. Facts laid carefully in sequence, waiting for the moment they would need to speak for themselves. The custody petition, when it finally arrived, was filed the same week. Brennan's lifestyle company announced a major partnership that would have benefited from a cleaner public image. Gwen had predicted the timing to within a month. The hearing was on a Tuesday morning in April. The courtroom was smaller than Sylvia expected, wood-paneled and deliberately unremarkable. Brennan arrived with 2 attorneys and a softened version of himself, as if he had practiced in a mirror. Gwen called her first witness, the obstetrician, who testified to the absence of any paternal contact during a high-risk twin pregnancy. She called the pediatrician, who confirmed no father of record had attended a single appointment in the first 4 months of the children's lives. She played, with the judge's permission, a voice message left on Sylvia's phone the week after the divorce. Brennan's voice clear and unambiguous. "Don't contact me about the pregnancy, Sylvia. I have attorneys for that." The judge looked at him over her glasses. Brennan's attorney spoke at length. The judge listened with a face that gave nothing away. Then she ruled. Primary physical custody to the mother, supervised visitation available to the father subject to a demonstrated commitment structure that he would have to initiate and maintain. Outside the courthouse, a small cluster of photographers waited. A reporter called out, "Ms. Hayward, do you want to comment on the ruling?" She thought about it for a moment. "My daughters are healthy and safe," she said. "That's all that matters today." It was a warm evening in late May when Lucas asked if she would walk with him through the renovated pediatric corridor. The work had taken 3 months, and it looked nothing like a hospital wing was supposed to look. The walls were a blue-green she had mixed herself, the color of shallow lake water in summer. The acoustic panels were mounted in irregular organic shapes that caught light differently, depending on the time of day. Each room had a narrow strip of south-facing window at child eye level, so a child lying in bed could still see sky. Lucas walked slowly, hands in his pockets, reading the space the way he had learned to read things, quietly, looking for what was actually there. "It's exactly what you described in the waiting room," he said. "That first conversation. I remember it." "So do I." He stopped near the window at the corridor's end. The lake was visible from here, the last of the day's light spreading flat and gold across the water. "Sylvia, I want to ask you something, and I want you to know you can say no without it changing anything between us." "Ask." He turned from the window to face her. "I'm not asking because I want to rescue you. I know you don't need that. I know what you built in the last 7 months, and what it cost, and what it says about who you are." He paused. "I'm asking because the quietest, most honest version of my life is the one that has you in it." She looked at him for a long moment. The corridor hummed softly around them. "On my terms," she said. "On your terms." He reached into his jacket pocket and held out a small box. Inside was a ring she would not have expected from a man who owned foundations and buildings. A warm-toned sapphire, not large, set simply in gold. "I had it made from a description you gave once. You said your favorite color was the water right before the light changes." She remembered saying that. She hadn't known he was listening that carefully. She slid the ring onto her finger. It fit exactly right. "Yes," she said. "Yes?" "Yes." She looked at him, and something settled in her chest that she recognized after a moment as the particular calm that follows something you've been bracing against for a long time finally not happening. Yes. They were married in September, in the backyard of a rented house in Lake Geneva, with water visible over the fence and guests numbering fewer than 20. Her daughters, 7 months old by then, were carried in by Gwen and Lucas's sister, dressed in white linen that they promptly tried to chew. Sylvia wore a dress the color of the sapphire on her finger. The design studio opened 2 months later on the 3rd floor of a Wicker Park building with south-facing windows and walls, painted the same blue-green as the pediatric corridor. She called it Hayward Design. Not Hayward Pemberton, not anything that connected it to anyone else's name. Hers. Talia Cruz's partnership with Avery and Associates dissolved that same winter quietly, after a sourcing investigation revealed that the influencer had used design elements from an uncredited third party in a sponsored campaign. Elements that bore a notable similarity to documented Sylvia Hayward work. The news cycled through industry feeds for a week and then was replaced by something else, the way news always was. Sylvia read about it once, thought there it is, and closed the tab. On the twins' first birthday, the table was full of people who had chosen to be there. Gwen. Lucas, his sister who had appointed herself the girls' unofficial curator of excellent books. Sylvia's mother, who had finally accepted the invitation, and was seated in the corner of the kitchen holding one baby and looking at the room around her with an expression of settled relief, as if she had been waiting a long time for evidence that her daughter was going to be fine. Lucas found Sylvia standing in the doorway to the small backyard, watching the last of the day's light go thin and gold over the rooftops. "You okay?" he said. She thought about the question, about the conference table on Michigan Avenue with the sleet on the windows, about the fluorescent waiting room where she had drawn floor plans from memory because she couldn't make herself stop, about the morning she had signed her name to a settlement and watched it come out steady. "More than okay," she said. He handed her a glass of sparkling water. From inside the apartment, one of the girls made a sound of furious delight about something. Neither of them knew what, they never did, and the room answered with laughter. Sylvia leaned against the doorframe and let the sound of it settle into her chest like something she intended to keep. She wasn't surviving anymore. She had passed through that and arrived somewhere on the other side, somewhere she recognized, finally, as hers.